You'd think that after barely escaping death, life would throw me a bone. A sense of peace, at the very least. But no, life decided I hadn't suffered enough. I woke up in that sterile, white-walled hospital room, my body aching from head to toe, with an IV stuck in my arm and machines beeping around me. My vision was blurry, my head heavy, but I could hear faint voices, familiar voices. It was Clara's laugh that drew my attention first. Soft, sweet, and reassuring. Everything I needed at that moment. For a second, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. My wife was here, by my side, just like she promised she would be. Then, another voice followed, deep and far too familiar for comfort. Andrew, my best friend. He had been around a lot lately, helping Clara with errands, keeping her company during my hospital stay. I thought he was just being a good friend, but what I heard next froze me. "Clara," he murmured, his voice low but unmistakably affectionate. "I've missed this." I didn't understand what he meant at first. Missed what? I could hear the shuffle of feet, the faint rustle of fabric, and then the kind of silence that screams louder than any sound. I cracked my eyes open, just a sliver, and that's when I saw it. Clara, my wife, the woman who vowed to love me through sickness and health. Standing there beside my bed, her lips locked with Andrew's, her hand resting on his chest like she had done it 1,000 times before. I wanted to scream, to shout, to leap out of that bed and tear him apart. But my body betrayed me. The accident had left me weak, my muscles refusing to obey the rage coursing through me. So I did the only thing I could. I closed my eyes and pretended to stay unconscious. It was the most painful thing I've ever done, lying there while they kissed, while they whispered to each other like teenagers sneaking around behind their parents' backs. Clara pulled back first, her voice soft and hesitant. "We shouldn't be doing this here." "Why not?" Andrew countered. "He's out cold. He won't even know." "I won't know." Those words hit me harder than the crash ever did. The audacity, the arrogance. Andrew had always been the charming one, the smooth talker. But this was a new low, and Clara, my Clara. She didn't even argue. Instead, she just sighed, a sound so familiar it made my heart ache, and then she whispered something I'll never forget. Maybe it's better this way. Better this way? What did she mean? Better for whom? Because it sure as hell wasn't better for me. My mind raced as I lay there, every nerve in my body on fire. How long had this been going on? Was this new, or had it been happening right under my nose? Questions swirled in my head, but one thing became clear. I wasn't the man they thought I was. I wasn't just going to lie there and let them get away with this. No, I was going to wait, plan, and when the time was right, I'd make sure they both paid for what they did to me. For now, though, I played the role of the injured, helpless husband. I let them have their moment, let them think they had me fooled. But deep down, I was already plotting. My recovery was no longer just about healing my body. It was about something much bigger. Revenge. I'd always believed in second chances, in forgiveness. But as I lay there, replaying their betrayal over and over in my mind, I knew one thing for sure. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. They thought I was weak. They thought I was powerless. They had no idea who they were messing with. The next few days were a haze of hospital routines and forced smiles. Nurses came and went, fussing over me as though I were a fragile antique about to crumble at any moment. Clara was there too, sitting dutifully by my side, holding my hand, her face painted with the perfect mask of concern. To anyone else, she looked like the picture of a devoted wife. To me, she looked like a stranger. You'd think betrayal would scream its presence, would sit there in every glance and gesture. But no, Clara played her role flawlessly. She dabbed my forehead with a damp cloth, fluffed my pillows, even kissed my cheek before leaving the room. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have thought she was still the woman who loved me. But I had seen it. And now, every touch from her felt like poison. Then there was Andrew. Oh, he was smooth, I'll give him that. He showed up every day with a warm smile, bringing flowers and cracking jokes to lighten the mood. "Just keeping an eye on you, buddy," he'd say, slapping my shoulder lightly. "Can't have you kicking the bucket on us." The audacity of it all made my blood boil. Keeping an eye on me? More like keeping an eye on his alibi. He'd sit there beside Clara, the two of them exchanging glances I now saw in a completely different light. They weren't just friends. They were partners in crime, bound together by their deceit. But I didn't confront them. Not yet. I was still too weak, both physically and emotionally. So I played along, letting them think I was oblivious. I laughed at Andrew's jokes, held Clara's hand, even thanked them for their support. Every word felt like gravel in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't afford to tip my hand too early. Instead, I observed. I watched the way Clara's eyes lingered on Andrew just a fraction too long. I noticed how Andrew's hand would brush against hers when he thought I wasn't looking. I saw the way they sat just a little too close, their conversations dipping into hushed tones whenever I stirred. It was like watching a play unfold, except this time I wasn't the clueless audience member. I was the director, waiting for my moment to bring the curtain down. The hospital became my battleground, my mind the weapon I honed with every passing hour. I started piecing together the puzzle, replaying every interaction, every conversation. How long had this been going on? Was it before the accident? Or had my brush with death been the catalyst for their betrayal? The questions gnawed at me, each one feeding the storm building inside. And yet, outwardly, I was the picture of calm. I smiled when Clara fed me spoonfuls of soup. I nodded along as Andrew recounted tales of his supposed loyalty. "You're lucky to have a friend like him," one nurse even commented. I almost laughed at the irony. Lucky? If only she knew. The quiet storm inside me grew with every passing day. I could feel it bubbling beneath the surface, a seething rage that threatened to consume me. But I held it back, knowing the time wasn't right. Clara and Andrew thought they had me fooled, thought I was too weak to fight back. They couldn't have been more wrong. Because here's the thing about storms. They don't announce their arrival. They build slowly, quietly, until they're ready to unleash their full fury. And when they do, nothing in their path is left standing. That's what I was becoming, a storm waiting to strike. And when I finally did, they wouldn't know what hit them. You know, there's something remarkable about silence. It gives you time to think. Lying in that hospital bed, playing the role of the broken man, I had all the time in the world. Time to piece together the betrayal. Time to let the storm in my chest swirl and gather strength. But more importantly, time to plan. It started small, like a game of chess. I needed to know more before I made my move. Confronting them immediately would have been satisfying, sure, but it wouldn't have been smart. No, I needed to expose them fully, catch them in the act, force them to see the fallout of their actions, and leave no room for denial. That's when the real justice would begin. Step 1. Gather evidence. I wasn't just going to rely on my memory of their kiss. People like Clara and Andrew, they thrive on twisting the truth, making you doubt your own reality. So, I started observing more closely. Clara's phone was my first target. She'd grown careless, assuming I wasn't paying attention, and often left it on the bedside table. When she stepped out for coffee or a call, I'd scroll through her messages. What I found was enough to make my stomach turn. The texts were subtle at first, inside jokes, casual banter. But as I dug deeper, the tone shifted. Late-night messages, heart emojis, and phrases like, "I don't know how much longer we can keep this secret." My heart clenched reading them, but I saved the screenshots on my own phone. Painful as it was, I needed this ammunition. Andrew, of course, was harder to pin down. He was too slick to leave a trail. But his arrogance was his weakness. He assumed he was untouchable, that I was too incapacitated to notice the way his hand lingered on Clara's shoulder, or how his eyes followed her when she moved. I started baiting him subtly, dropping hints to see how he'd react. Clara's been amazing, I'd say with a faint smile. I don't know how I'd get through this without her. His face would twitch, just slightly, as though my gratitude was a bitter pill to swallow. Step 2. Create the perfect stage. If this was going to end, it had to be dramatic. No quiet confrontation, no closed doors. I wanted them exposed. I pretended to need more physical therapy, telling Clara I'd prefer to do it in a private facility. Andrew, ever the supportive friend, offered to help drive me there. Perfect. The plan was in motion. I deliberately chose a day when the therapy center would be nearly empty, ensuring no interruptions. The facility had private rooms for patients, and I made sure to request one with a large mirror on the wall. Not for vanity, but for strategy. I needed a reflection, a way to watch them without them realizing I was watching. Finally, step 3. Let them think they've won. Clara and Andrew had grown comfortable in their deceit, assuming my injuries made me powerless. I encouraged that illusion, letting Clara tuck me in at night with a kiss on the forehead, smiling weakly at Andrew's jokes. The more they thought I was oblivious, the easier it would be to catch them off guard. But beneath the surface, every smile I gave, every word I spoke, was laced with venom. My rage was like a coiled snake, waiting for the right moment to strike. I wasn't just planning a confrontation. I was planning their reckoning. I knew they thought I was weak. I knew they thought they'd get away with it. But the thing about predators is, they always underestimate the prey. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't their prey. I was the trap. And they were walking straight into it. I smiled to myself as I finalized the plan in my mind. The pieces were set, the stage prepared. All I had to do now was wait. And when the moment came, I'd make sure they felt every ounce of the pain they'd inflicted on me. Every betrayal, every lie, they'd pay for it all. And I wouldn't stop until they did. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed confirmation. Solid, undeniable proof that would leave no room for Clara or Andrew to wiggle out of their betrayal. My suspicions and those stolen glances at Clara's phone weren't enough. No, I needed to lay their lies bare for the world to see. My first breakthrough came one afternoon when Clara stepped out to run an errand, leaving her phone charging on the nightstand. I had minutes, maybe less, but that was all I needed. With trembling hands, I scrolled through her text conversations. There it was again, her thread with Andrew. My heart pounded as I read their messages, my fury growing with every word. "He seems weaker today," Andrew had written. "It's probably the meds," Clara had replied. "He barely notices anything anymore." Barely notices? I clenched my fists, the betrayal sinking deeper. They thought I was a ghost in my own life, too broken to see the truth right in front of me. But the real gut punch came further down the thread. "I can't wait for this to be over," Andrew texted. "When can we stop sneaking around?" Clara's reply was like a dagger to my chest. "Soon. Let me figure out how to tell him. He deserves the truth, but not yet." I couldn't believe what I was reading. My wife, my partner, was plotting the end of our marriage while sitting at my bedside pretending to care. And Andrew, the man I'd called a friend, was all too eager to take my place. But I didn't stop there. Clara's phone revealed more than I expected. Photos of them together, smiling in places she'd claimed to be running errands. A picture of Andrew in our living room, sitting on the couch where Clara and I had spent countless evenings. Each image felt like a slap, but I saved them all. Proof. Cold, hard proof. Next, I turned my focus to Andrew. He was clever, careful, but not as much as he thought. He'd often bring his tablet when visiting me, leaving it unattended while chatting with Clara. It didn't take long to figure out his password, his mother's birthday, something he'd once mentioned in passing. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I was crossing a line, but then I reminded myself, they crossed it first. Andrew's tablet held the final pieces of the puzzle. Emails between him and Clara, planning their rendezvous. A draft of a letter he'd written but never sent, declaring his love for her and his impatience to start their new life together. My jaw tightened as I read his words, my anger simmering just below the surface. What struck me most was their sheer arrogance. They truly believed they could keep this hidden, that I was too weak, too broken, to uncover their deceit. But they underestimated me. Every email, every text, every photo, I saved it all, building an arsenal of evidence that would destroy their lies. But it wasn't just about gathering proof. I wanted to understand. How did it come to this? Was I blind to the cracks in my marriage, or had Clara and Andrew been plotting behind my back all along? The questions kept me awake at night, gnawing at my sanity. But with each new piece of evidence, the picture became clearer. Clara wasn't the woman I thought she was. Andrew wasn't the friend I believed him to be. And I wasn't the weak, helpless man they assumed I'd become. I was the storm they never saw coming. By the time Clara returned to the hospital, I had everything I needed. But I didn't let on. I smiled weakly as she walked in, pretending to be oblivious. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath. "Good," she replied, leaning down to kiss my forehead. I let her. Not because I forgave her, but because I needed her to think I hadn't figured it out yet. The evidence was in my hands, but the confrontation was still to come. I wasn't just going to accuse them. No, I was going to make them face the weight of their betrayal to see the destruction they'd caused. I didn't just want the truth, I wanted justice. And when the time came, I'd make sure they got exactly what they deserved. The day I decided to confront them was like any other. Or at least, that's what I let them think. Clara had been her usual doting self, hovering over me with her saccharine voice and carefully rehearsed expressions of concern. Andrew, ever the opportunist, had arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, flashing his practiced smile as he breezed into the room. They thought it was just another day in their charade. They had no idea it would be the day their lies unraveled. I had spent the morning steeling myself, rehearsing the scene in my head. Confronting them wasn't just about releasing my anger. It was about reclaiming my dignity. But I knew one thing. I couldn't just accuse them. I needed to make them expose themselves, to see their guilt writ large on their faces. So I waited, biding my time until the moment was right. It came in the early afternoon, when Clara stepped out to grab lunch, leaving me alone with Andrew. He leaned back in the chair by my bed, scrolling casually through his phone as if he hadn't betrayed the very person lying in front of him. My hands itched to lash out, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was a chess game, and I couldn't let my rage ruin the strategy. "Andrew?" I said, my voice weak but deliberate. He looked up, surprised that I'd initiated conversation. "Yeah, buddy? What's up?" His tone was light, almost jovial, as if we were old friends catching up. "I've been thinking," I began, staring at the ceiling as though lost in thought, "about how lucky I am to have people like you and Clara. I mean, you've both been so supportive through all of this." Andrew shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his smile faltering just slightly. "Of course, man. That's what friends are for." I turned my head to look at him, my eyes locking onto his. "But it's funny," I continued, my voice steady now, "how support can sometimes look like betrayal when you really pay attention." His face froze for a split second before he recovered, plastering on his trademark grin. "What are you talking about? You're not making sense." "Oh, I think I am," I said, sitting up slightly in the bed despite the pain in my ribs. "It's amazing what you notice when you're lying here, day after day. the little things people think you're too out of it to see. His eyes darted toward the door, as if hoping Clara would return to interrupt the conversation. But she wasn't coming back. Not yet. I'd made sure of that. I reached for my phone, pulling up the photos, the texts, the emails I'd collected. I held it out to him, watching as the color drained from his face. "Do you want to explain this, Andrew?" I asked, my voice cold now, each word dripping with restrained fury. He didn't even try to deny it. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. I saw the panic in his eyes, the realization that his carefully crafted facade was crumbling before him. And that's when Clara walked back in. "What's going on?" she asked, her cheerful tone vanishing the moment she saw the look on my face. Her eyes flicked to Andrew, who was still holding my phone, and then back to me. "Michael, what's this?" "What's this?" I repeated, my voice rising. "This is the truth, Clara. This is what you and Andrew have been doing behind my back while I've been lying here, fighting to recover." Clara's face went pale, her hands trembling as she stepped closer. "Michael, it's not what you think. Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't you dare insult me with more lies." Andrew tried to interject, but I was done listening. My anger boiled over, years of trust and love shattered in an instant. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through my body, and stood up. "You thought I wouldn't figure it out?" I roared, my voice echoing in the small room. "You thought I'd just lie here, blind to your betrayal?" Andrew stammered something, but I didn't care. I lunged at him, my fist connecting with his jaw before he could react. The adrenaline coursing through me made me forget my injuries, made me forget everything except the need to make him feel just a fraction of the pain I'd been carrying. It took 2 nurses and a security guard to pull me off him. Andrew lay on the floor, clutching his arm, his face twisted in agony. Clara was sobbing, pleading with me to stop, but I didn't hear her. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears like a war drum. I looked down at Andrew, broken and pathetic, and then at Clara, her tears streaming down her face. "This is what you chose," I said, my voice cold and flat. "You chose him over me, and now you'll live with the consequences." As they wheeled me out of the room, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm had broken, and though I wasn't sure what came next, one thing was certain. I would never let either of them hurt me again. The chaos that followed my outburst felt surreal. Security escorted Andrew out of the hospital, his arm hanging limp at his side, his face contorted with pain. Nurses fussed over me as if I were the one who needed saving, trying to convince me to return to my bed. But I couldn't lie down. Not yet. Not after everything that had just happened. Clara stood frozen in the corner of the room, her tear-streaked face a mix of fear, shame, and disbelief. She didn't dare speak to me, didn't even attempt to explain herself. Maybe she knew there was nothing she could say that would undo the damage. Or maybe she was still reeling from the fact that her carefully constructed web of lies had unraveled so spectacularly. I sat back on the hospital bed, my body screaming in protest from the physical exertion, but my mind was racing. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the weight of what had just transpired began to sink in. I had exposed them, her and Andrew, but at what cost? The head nurse came into the room shortly after, her expression stern but laced with concern. "Mr. Carter," she said firmly, "we understand you're upset, but this behavior cannot be tolerated. Violence." "Spare me the lecture," I interrupted, my voice hoarse but steady. "If you knew what I've been through, you'd be dragging him back in here for round 2. Her lips tightened, but she didn't press further. Instead, she gestured for the other nurses to leave, giving me a moment alone with Clara. The silence between us was suffocating. Clara shifted awkwardly, wringing her hands as she struggled to meet my gaze. Finally, she broke the silence. "Michael," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know where to start. Then don't, I said coldly, cutting her off. I've heard enough lies to last me a lifetime. She flinched at my tone, her tears starting up again. I never meant for this to happen, she said, her voice trembling. I swear it wasn't supposed to go this far. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and unrecognizable even to me. Oh, so what was it supposed to be, Clara? A little harmless fun? A distraction while I lay here fighting for my life? Her face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with. The woman who had once promised to stand by me through everything. But that image was quickly replaced by the reality of what she had done. I was lonely, she admitted, her voice barely audible. You were so hurt, and I felt so helpless. And Andrew, he was just there. He made me feel seen. Seen? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You're telling me you betrayed me because you felt invisible? Do you even hear yourself? She broke down completely then, sinking into the chair beside my bed as sobs racked her body. But I didn't feel sympathy. Not this time. Her tears didn't move me. They only made me angrier. Do you think your tears fix this? I said, my voice low but laced with venom. Do you think they erase the image of you kissing him right there beside my sick bed? Do you even realize how disgusting that is? She didn't respond, just buried her face in her hands. I stared at her, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, hurt, betrayal, and something else I couldn't quite name. After a long moment, I spoke again, my tone colder than before. You need to leave. Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face filled with panic. What? Michael, please, we can work through this. I made a mistake, but I love you. Love? I interrupted, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. You don't get to use that word, Clara. Not after what you did. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand to stop her. Get out, I said firmly. Go home, pack your things, and don't come back. I don't want to see your face again. Her sobs grew louder, but she didn't argue further. She stood slowly, her shoulders slumped in defeat, and walked toward the door. Just before she left, she turned back to me, her voice trembling. I'm sorry, Michael, for everything. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The betrayal was too fresh, the wounds too deep. All I could do was watch as she disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone with the broken pieces of our life. The room was quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful. The weight of everything pressed down on me, suffocating in its intensity. I had confronted them, exposed their betrayal, but the storm inside me wasn't gone. It had only just begun. And as I sat there, staring at the empty doorway, I realized that my fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. After Clara left, the silence in the hospital room felt heavier than ever. It wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace. It was suffocating, oppressive, a constant reminder of everything I had just lost. My wife, my best friend, my sense of trust in the people I thought would never hurt me. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the events of the past few hours in my mind. Her words echoed in my head like a cruel taunt. I never meant for this to happen. What did that even mean? Did it make her feel better to think she hadn't planned to betray me? That it was somehow accidental? Love wasn't supposed to be something you stumbled into, or out of, for that matter. And Andrew. His smug face flashed in my mind, and my fists clenched involuntarily. The man I had called my brother. The man I had trusted with everything. He hadn't even tried to apologize, hadn't offered a single word of remorse. He just lay there on the floor like the coward he was, broken and exposed. I'd broken his arm, but it didn't feel like enough, not even close. I wanted answers. I wanted to know when it started, how long it had been going on, and what gave them the audacity to think they could do this to me. But most of all, I wanted to know why. What had I done to deserve this? Had I been blind to the cracks in my marriage? Had I been so focused on surviving my accident that I didn't notice my life falling apart around me? The questions kept coming, swirling in my mind like a relentless storm. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't make sense of their betrayal. Some part of me wanted to believe it was a mistake, that Clara had been manipulated, that Andrew had somehow coerced her. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. The sound of the door opening jolted me from my thoughts. A nurse walked in, her expression cautious as she carried a tray of medication. She avoided my gaze, clearly aware of the earlier commotion. "Time for your painkillers, Mr. Carter," she said softly, placing the tray on the bedside table. I didn't respond, just stared at the pills as if they held the answers I was searching for. "Do they help with emotional pain, too?" I muttered, more to myself than to her. The nurse hesitated, then gave me a small, sympathetic smile. "Sometimes it helps to talk to someone," she offered gently. "You've been through a lot." I almost laughed at the understatement. A lot didn't even begin to cover it. But I didn't have the energy to argue, so I nodded and took the pills, washing them down with a sip of water. The nurse left without another word, leaving me alone with my thoughts once again. I thought about calling someone, my parents, a friend, anyone who could offer a shred of comfort. But who would I call? The one person I would have turned to in a moment like this was the very man who had betrayed me. And Clara, she was the last person I wanted to talk to. As the hours passed, the weight of it all settled deeper into my chest. The betrayal wasn't just about Clara and Andrew. It was about the life I thought I had, the future I thought I was building. It was about the realization that the people you love most are the ones who can hurt you the worst. I knew I had decisions to make, and they weren't going to be easy. Clara's apology meant nothing to me. Not now. Maybe not ever. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her promises to make things right. And Andrew? The thought of his face made my blood boil. I had no doubt I'd be seeing him again, but not on friendly terms. As night fell and the hospital grew quiet, I made a vow to myself. I wasn't going to let their betrayal destroy me. I wasn't going to let it define me. They had taken enough from me already. My trust, my peace of mind, my marriage. But they weren't going to take my dignity. Clara and Andrew had made their choices, and now it was my turn. The storm wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. But this time, I wasn't the victim. This time, I was the one in control. And when the dust finally settled, they would know exactly what it felt like to be broken. The next morning, clarity hit me like a lightning bolt. They had stripped me of my trust, humiliated me, and shattered the very foundation of my life. But if there was one thing I still had, it was the truth. The raw, undeniable truth of their betrayal. And I was going to wield it like a weapon. I had all the evidence I needed. The text messages, the photos, the emails, all of it was stored safely on my phone. It wasn't enough for me to simply confront them anymore. That had already happened. This time, I wanted their betrayal to be as public as possible. I wanted everyone to see who they truly were. A wife who could kiss another man beside her injured husband's hospital bed, and a best friend who had no qualms about stabbing his brother in the back. The plan was straightforward, but devastating. I began drafting an email that would leave no room for misinterpretation. I addressed it to our circle of friends, Clara's family, and Andrew's colleagues. Everyone who had ever thought of them as trustworthy, respectable people. The subject line was simple. The truth about Clara and Andrew. Inside, I attached the screenshots, photos, and emails, each one carefully annotated with dates and times for maximum impact. But I didn't hit send. Not yet. This wasn't a decision to be made lightly. Once I pressed that button, there would be no going back. Their reputations, their relationships, their lives. It would all come crashing down. And yet, as I stared at the screen, a grim sense of satisfaction washed over me. They had made their choices. Now they would face the consequences. Before I sent the email, I decided to call Clara. Not out of mercy, she didn't deserve that, but because I wanted her to hear it from me first. She picked up on the second ring, her voice tentative. "Michael?" "Clara," I said, my tone devoid of warmth. "I thought you should know. I'm about to expose everything. The texts, the photos, the emails. Everyone's going to know the truth about you and Andrew." Her gasp was audible. "Michael, please don't do this. We can talk. We can work this out." "Work this out?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You destroyed our marriage, Clara. You humiliated me. And now you want me to protect you from the fallout? Number, you don't get to ask that of me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, broken only by the sound of her quiet sobs. But her tears didn't move me anymore. They were just another reminder of her guilt. "You brought this on yourself," I said finally. "You and Andrew. And now, you're going to have to live with the consequences." I hung up before she could respond, her cries still echoing in my ears. For a moment, I hesitated, my finger hovering over the send button. But then I thought about the betrayal, the lies, the sheer audacity of what they had done. And I pressed it. The email went out at exactly 10:47 a.m. The fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed with notifications as messages poured in. Shock, disbelief, outrage. Friends who had once admired Clara and Andrew expressed their anger and disappointment. Some called me, offering their support and condemning their actions. Others stayed silent, no doubt struggling to reconcile the people they thought they knew with the truth I had revealed. By midday, Clara's sister called me, her voice laced with anger. "Michael, how could you do this? Clara is devastated." "She's devastated?" I shot back. "Tell her to imagine how I felt watching her kiss Andrew while I was lying in a hospital bed." There was no response, just a stunned silence before she hung up. As for Andrew, I heard through mutual acquaintances that his boss had received the email and was less than impressed. It turns out that sleeping with your best friend's wife doesn't exactly scream trustworthy employee. The last I heard, he was taking some time off to deal with personal matters. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. By the end of the day, Clara and Andrew were pariahs, their carefully crafted images shattered. And while it didn't erase the pain they had caused me, it felt good, satisfying even, to know they were finally facing the consequences of their actions. But even as the dust settled, I knew this wasn't the end. Exposing the truth was just the first step. There was still more to uncover, more to understand. Because as satisfying as it was to see their world crumble, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was another layer to their betrayal, something darker, something I hadn't yet uncovered. And I was determined to find it. I thought I had seen the worst of it. I thought the betrayal, the lies, and the public exposure of Clara and Andrew's affair were the peak of my misery. But as it turned out, life had one more blow to deliver, one that would change everything I thought I knew about my accident and my so-called best friend. It came in the form of an unmarked letter delivered to my hospital room late one evening. The nurse handed it to me with a puzzled look, but I barely noticed. The envelope was plain, my name scrawled on the front in hurried, uneven handwriting. I hesitated, my gut twisting with a sense of foreboding. Slowly, I tore it open and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. "Michael, you need to know the truth about your accident. Andrew isn't just a liar and a cheat. He's a criminal. The accident wasn't an accident. He tampered with your car. He wanted you out of the way so he could have Clara all to himself." I stared at the words, my mind struggling to process what I was reading. The accusation was so outrageous, so sinister, that it almost didn't feel real. But the more I thought about it, the more it started to make a sick kind of sense. Andrew had been suspiciously present after the accident. Too supportive, too eager to insert himself into my life. And the way the brakes had failed that day, it had all seemed so sudden, so inexplicable. Until now. For a long time I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands. Could Andrew really have done this? Could the man I'd trusted like a brother have deliberately tried to kill me? The thought was almost too much to bear, but deep down, I knew I couldn't dismiss it. But I didn't hit send. Not yet. This wasn't a decision to be made lightly. Once I pressed that button, there would be no going back. Their reputations, their relationships, their lives. It would all come crashing down. And yet, as I stared at the screen, a grim sense of satisfaction washed over me. They had made their choices. Now they would face the consequences. Before I sent the email, I decided to call Clara. Not out of mercy, she didn't deserve that, but because I wanted her to hear it from me first. She picked up on the second ring, her voice tentative. "Michael?" "Clara," I said, my tone devoid of warmth. "I thought you should know. I'm about to expose everything. The texts, the photos, the emails. Everyone's going to know the truth about you and Andrew." Her gasp was audible. "Michael, please don't do this. We can talk. We can work this out." "Work this out?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You destroyed our marriage, Clara. You humiliated me. And now you want me to protect you from the fallout? Number, you don't get to ask that of me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, broken only by the sound of her quiet sobs. But her tears didn't move me anymore. They were just another reminder of her guilt. "You brought this on yourself," I said finally. "You and Andrew. And now, you're going to have to live with the consequences." I hung up before she could respond, her cries still echoing in my ears. For a moment I hesitated, my finger hovering over the send button. But then I thought about the betrayal, the lies, the sheer audacity of what they had done. And I pressed it. The email went out at exactly 10:47 a.m. The fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed with notifications as messages poured in. Shock, disbelief, outrage. Friends who had once admired Clara and Andrew expressed their anger and disappointment. Some called me, offering their support and condemning their actions. Others stayed silent, no doubt struggling to reconcile the people they thought they knew with the truth I had revealed. By midday, Clara's sister called me, her voice laced with anger. "Michael, how could you do this? Clara is devastated." "She's devastated?" I shot back. "Tell her to imagine how I felt watching her kiss Andrew while I was lying in a hospital bed." There was no response, just a stunned silence before she hung up. As for Andrew, I heard through mutual acquaintances that his boss had received the email and was less than impressed. It turns out that sleeping with your best friend's wife doesn't exactly scream trustworthy employee. The last I heard, he was taking some time off to deal with personal matters. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. By the end of the day, Clara and Andrew were pariahs, their carefully crafted images shattered. And while it didn't erase the pain they had caused me, it felt good, satisfying even, to know they were finally facing the consequences of their actions. But even as the dust settled, I knew this wasn't the end. Exposing the truth was just the first step. There was still more to uncover, more to understand. Because as satisfying as it was to see their world crumble, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was another layer to their betrayal, something darker, something I hadn't yet uncovered. And I was determined to find it. I thought I had seen the worst of it. I thought the betrayal, the lies, and the public exposure of Clara and Andrew's affair were the peak of my misery. But as it turned out, life had one more blow to deliver, one that would change everything I thought I knew about my accident and my so-called best friend. It came in the form of an unmarked letter delivered to my hospital room late one evening. The nurse handed it to me with a puzzled look, but I barely noticed. The envelope was plain, my name scrawled on the front in hurried, uneven handwriting. I hesitated, my gut twisting with a sense of foreboding. Slowly, I tore it open and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Michael, you need to know the truth about your accident. Andrew isn't just a liar and a cheat. He's a criminal. The accident wasn't an accident. He tampered with your car. He wanted you out of the way so he could have Clara all to himself. I stared at the words, my mind struggling to process what I was reading. The accusation was so outrageous, so sinister, that it almost didn't feel real. But the more I thought about it, the more it started to make a sick kind of sense. Andrew had been suspiciously present after the accident. Too supportive, too eager to insert himself into my life. And the way the brakes had failed that day, it had all seemed so sudden, so inexplicable. Until now. For a long time I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands. Could Andrew really have done this? Could the man I'd trusted like a brother have deliberately tried to kill me? The thought was almost too much to bear, but deep down, I knew I couldn't dismiss it. I called the police that night, my voice shaking as I explained the contents of the letter. The detective on the other end listened carefully, asking questions about Andrew, the accident, and any other details I could remember. "We'll investigate," he assured me. "If there's any truth to this, we'll find it." The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension and waiting. The police examined my car, which had been sitting in a garage since the accident. Meanwhile, I found myself replaying every interaction with Andrew in my mind, looking for signs I might have missed. The smirk he wore when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way he had inserted himself into Clara's life. The arrogance of a man who thought he could get away with murder. Then the call came. "Mr. Carter," the detective said, his tone grave. "We've found evidence that your brake lines were deliberately cut. This was no accident. We believe there's enough to bring Andrew in for questioning." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed made the betrayal feel even more personal, more devastating. Andrew hadn't just stolen my wife. He had tried to steal my life. And for what? To be with Clara? To take everything I had? The police moved quickly, arresting Andrew the next day. I wasn't there to see it, but the image of him being led away in handcuffs gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. Justice was finally catching up to him, and he had no one to blame but himself. Clara called me that night, her voice frantic. "Michael, I had no idea," she cried. "I swear, I didn't know what Andrew was planning. Please, you have to believe me." I listened in silence, letting her words wash over me like meaningless noise. Whether she knew or not didn't matter anymore. Her betrayal had already destroyed our marriage. This revelation only solidified the fact that I could never trust her again. "Clara," I said finally, my voice cold and steady. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. Don't call me again." I hung up, feeling a strange sense of closure. For the first time in weeks, the storm inside me began to settle. The betrayal, the lies, the pain. It was all still there, but now it had a resolution. Andrew would face the full weight of the law, and Clara would be left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. But as satisfying as it was to see justice served, I knew this wasn't just about them. It was about me reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my future. They had taken so much from me, but they hadn't taken everything. I was still here, I was still standing, and I was ready to move forward. The next day, I signed my discharge papers, leaving the hospital behind. As I stepped out into the crisp morning air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was mine to walk. No more lies, no more betrayal. Just me, standing tall, ready to rebuild my life one step at a time.